Hello YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter nations. Desktop Bible Guy here. Well, today we're going to continue our study of John chapter 4. In the last episode, I had completed up to verse 15 of this chapter. So today we're going to continue with verse 16 and following. So John 4:16, and I'm going to start by reading from verse 16 to verse 18. John 4:16 to 18 says, "And he said to her, 'Go call your husband and come here.' And the woman answered and said, 'I have no husband.' Jesus said to her, 'You have well said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. This you have said truly.'" Now, in verses 16 to 18, the conversation moves off the topic that it's been on until now. It moves off the topic of living water and onto the topic of the woman's private life. When Jesus tells this woman to go call her husband and come back, she's very quick to respond that she has no husband. Now, Andreas J. Kostenberger, I believe, is correct when he asserts that the woman's main purpose behind her response is primarily to avoid embarrassment about this subject. And although she's technically not lying, she's telling a half-truth. She's trying to take attention off of herself in this situation. She's not comfortable with this topic at all, and because of that, she'll quickly turn the topic to religion. We've all had a situation where somebody tries to change a subject, and sometimes it can be painfully obvious that that's what they're trying to do, and I think that's what we have here. Okay. So 4:19 and 20 says, the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you people say that Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." You see how she rather abruptly changes the subject here. Now, she says that you people say that that Jerusalem is the proper place to worship, while we say that this mountain, which would have been I believe Mount Gerizim, if I'm not mistaken, is the proper place to worship. Now, what she's getting at here is the fact that, the you people she refers to is the Jewish people, of which Jesus is one. And the us she's referring to again is the Samaritan people. And there's basically at least what one needs to understand in order to understand the main assertion she's making in this conversation is that there was a dispute between the Jewish people and the Samaritan people as to where the proper site of God was to be. Now, Jews believed that God had specified Jerusalem as the proper place for the temple to be built. Now, the first temple was built by the son of David, who you may know as King Solomon, and this was Jerusalem's most beautiful temple, but that was eventually destroyed. And then sometime later, quite a long time later, the temple was eventually rebuilt by the people that came back to the Promised Land after a time of exile away. And this temple was built by Zerubbabel and the people that were with him. This was what's known as the Second Temple, and it was also expanded upon by Herod, and this is the temple that you see Jesus going into in the Gospels. And to this day, as of right now, there is no Jewish temple in Jerusalem because it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, I believe. And to this day, the Jews are seeking to build what would be the third temple on the Temple Mount site. But unfortunately, right now, that's a little bit hard to do because the temple, the Dome of the Rock, one of the most holy sites in the Islamic faith, is currently on the site where it belongs. But nevertheless, an organization called the Temple Institute in Jerusalem has basically been working since the day of its founding to kind of create a prefabricated temple so that the minute they get the chance to put it up, they can put it up. They've also trained a priesthood. They've created all of the temple implements and everything that's needed to go in its place when the time comes where it's needed. So that's kind of a miniature history on the Jewish temple. a simplified version, but that's what's pertinent to this conversation. Now, the other side of this conversation, in other words, the Samaritan side. Now, the Samaritans believed that it was not Jerusalem that was the legitimate site God had specified, but rather Mount Gerizim. So they built a rival temple there, and they believed that that was where worship was to happen. So they did. Okay. Excuse me 1 second. I went ahead and got off the proper book here. 1 second, please. John 4. Okay, so verses 21 to 26 say as follows. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall you worship the Father. You worship that which you do not know, and we worship that which we know. For salvation is from the Jews, but an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such people the Father seeks to be his worshippers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ, and when he comes, he will declare all things to us. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Now, in verses 21 to 26 of chapter 4, Jesus is teaching this woman three important truths. The first truth would be that worship is not about being in a physical location, but about worshiping God both in spirit and in truth. The second truth is that the promised Messiah is, in fact, Jewish. Hence the statement, salvation is from the Jews. In other words, Jesus is saying, with all the problems that the Jews have had in their spiritual life, notwithstanding, nevertheless, the Jewish nation was and is God's chosen people through whom the Messiah would come. In other words, there were certain truths that the Samaritans and the Jews shared, because I believe the Samaritans and the Jews had a shared belief in the validity of the first 5 books of Moses, or the Torah. That would be Genesis through Deuteronomy. The Samaritans believed in the validity of these 5 books, but not much else, if I am correct. So what Jesus is saying is that Judaism is, or the Jews are the chosen people through whom the Messiah would come. And the third major spiritual truth is that Jesus himself is that Messiah. He's saying that the one speaking, the one speaking to her, is in fact that Messiah. Okay, so verse 26 marks the end of the conversation between Jesus and this woman. And I see that I've gone over time. I've reached our 15-minute mark and gone over it. So in our next episode, I'll continue with John chapter 4, verses 27 and following. I hope you can join me for that next episode. Until then, take care and God bless.